Welcome back. Let's get right to our countdown of the top 5.
Reason number 5 is the defendant in this case, Jerry Krause. He delivered quality goods.
It's unfair for the city to hate Jerry Krause and dismiss him as a bumbling idiot. He put 6 championship teams on the floor. Who else did that?
Aside from Michael Jordan, he was the most valuable person. I mean, he assembled that team. Year after year, he assembled it, and then he reassembled it, and he filled in the holes, and he brought in the pieces, and that was all Krause.
When Krause was hired as vice president of basketball operations in March of 1985, the Bulls, who had made the playoffs once in 7 seasons, were a pedestrian band with one brilliant soloist.
We had a bad ball club and a young man named Jordan and 11 guys we didn't want. And we had to rebuild that, to totally turn that thing around.
Every single component that contributed to each of the 6 championships was provided by Jerry Krause, starting with Phil Jackson himself.
There was a plan there that he followed that worked perfectly.
The genius of Jerry Krause was in finding players who would be better playing with Michael Jordan than they would be anyplace else.
Krause was able to complement him with Bill Cartwright, defense, rebounding, and Cartwright was a special kind of personality that affected the rest of the team.
Horace Grant became one of the Bulls' Dobermans, one of the key people in their pressure defense, one of the key people in their rebounding.
There was some tremendous coups. The guy who really identified and really maneuvered and moved mountains to orchestrate a deal to get Scottie Pippen was Jerry Krause.
We went after John Paxson. No one especially was interested in John Paxson. He was practically a gift to us.
Paxson for 3! Yeah!
After Chicago completed its first three-peat in 1993, Michael Jordan abruptly retired in the wake of gambling allegations and his father's murder. 2 years later, when Jordan returned to the Bulls, Krause again revamped his star supporting cast.
Jordan and Pippen are the only 2 players on the second three-peat team that were on the first three-peat team. So over a couple of years, Jerry really turned the ball club over.
I think history will show that Jerry Krause needs to be given credit for putting that support staff around Jordan.
Chicago Bulls are world champions for the 6th time in the 90s.
I knew there was going to be a time where we were going to have to rebuild. It wasn't something that I relished, but at that time, I wanted to continue that team as long as we could win championships.
When the brilliant trinity of Jordan, Jackson, and Pippen went their separate ways, Krause hunkered down in the hope of crafting a new championship team.
What were you going to do? At that point, you had no Pippen, you had no Jordan, you had no Phil Jackson, you had no veteran core. The best idea was to break it down, to start over, to draft high, to save money under the cap for free agency.
You can't blame Jerry Krause because he won 6 championships in 8 years. And you win 6 championships, you don't deserve to be blamed for anything.
Did that reason grab you? If not, we've got 4 more to go. Here's reason number 4.
Scottie Pippen. If Krause was unappreciated by the fans, Pippen was short-ended by the front office. Voted in 1996 as one of the NBA's 50 all-time greatest players, the 7-time All-Star complained that he was not only unappreciated, but underpaid.
Scottie said stuff like that all the time. You know, he's quitting the team. He's quitting basketball. I mean, who could be? He says, "I'm never going to wear a Bulls uniform again."
Scottie thought that he should get more respect. He thought that he should be held up on a pedestal as a superstar in the league.
The '98 season, when Pippen was out injured and angry and asking to be traded, Krause was on the bus, and Pippen was drunk at the back, screaming at Jerry Krause to trade him, and it got really ugly.
The source of Pippen's frustration was a 5-year, $18 million contract extension he signed in 1991. 3 years later, he was the Bulls' 5th highest paid player.
It was his fault. I mean, he wanted a contract that was front-loaded. So Jerry Reinsdorf held him to it, and he resented that.
Both Mr. Reinsdorf and I sat in a room with Scottie and said, "Don't sign this contract, it's going to be outmoded." And he said, "I need the security, I want the contract."
See, Scottie was immature, and he just wanted that money. And even though Reinsdorf told him that, Pippen did it.
When the Bulls refused to renegotiate his contract, Pippen began counting down his days to free agency.
Scottie wanted out. He wanted to make his big money and wanted to try to prove himself outside of the shadow of Jordan.
I think Scotty was going to go. I really believe that. I think Scotty wanted a payday. He wanted a multi-year deal. He wanted security. I think that impacts everything else.
9 days after Jordan retired, Pippen got what he wanted by signing a 5-year, $67 million contract with Chicago with the understanding he would be dealt to Houston in a sign and trade. With the Bulls' dynasty reduced to a memory, the rest of the cast dispersed throughout the league.
I ended up signing right after that with San Antonio, and Judd Bushler signed with Detroit, and Bill Wennington went to Sacramento. But Scotty's signing with Houston was probably the first domino to fall.
I think a significant amount of blame can be placed on Scottie Pippen's departure from Chicago and the downfall of the Chicago Bulls. He was a player that you could build a team around, and when he left, I think it all kind of fell apart.
When we return to the top 5 reasons you can't blame Jerry Krause for the demise of the Bulls, we'll examine the Zen Master's role in the team's breakup.
Jerry Krause did not break up the Bulls. Phil Jackson broke up the Bulls.
We're counting down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Jerry Krause for the demise of the Chicago Bulls.
Welcome back. Did the first 2 reasons stop and make you think? If so, here's some more food for thought. Reason number 3.
Phil Jackson left. His decision not to renew his contract drove a stake into the heart of the Bulls.
The one person who might have been able to keep the dynasty together was Phil Jackson, because I think if Jackson had decided to come back, Jordan would have played for him.
Phil deserves some of the blame. I really believe that they would have stuck around for one more year. Jerry Reinsdorf would have brought them all back for one more year if Phil had given the word.
Acting in concert with Michael Jordan, Jackson over 9 seasons had created such a steely, if not insular, team mentality, there was no room for anyone from the outside, especially Jerry Krause.
One common binding element he found was that they all had this resentment on some level about something toward Krause. And he said, well, maybe we can use that.
Phil was the ringleader, and that was the most amazing thing to me about Phil, was how he was able to get these superstar players to side with him and create these perceived battles between the players and management.
Phil was motivating the team, and it's a great ploy, and it was the players against management, and it worked.
He knew how much power he had. He knew that no matter pretty much whatever he did, that he wouldn't be looked at as the bad guy. Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf would be looked at as the bad guys. And he took advantage of that power.
Jerry Krause did not break up the Bulls. Phil Jackson broke up the Bulls. Phil Jackson engineered the whole thing. They wanted Phil to come back and coach again. Jerry Reinsdorf begged him to come back and coach again. But Jackson vowed that he would coach one more year and never coach again.
Even though at the end of the season, the ownership still offered me a job, Jerry Krause and I basically had agreement that we got on far enough with each other.
I think Phil Jackson, up until the moment he got on his motorcycle and rode off into the sunset, could have said, you know what, I want to coach one more year, or I want to coach 2 more years.
Phil did walk away from his team in a lot of ways. He portrayed it as being pushed out when in fact he was moving on his own volition.
3 reasons down and 2 to go. Here's reason number 2.
Jerry Reinsdorf. Out of loyalty to Krause, the Bulls owner chose not to address the impending breakup.
I have to blame the owner for this, because I can think of too many owners out there who would have found a way to keep this all together. I think the fault rests with him.
It still takes an owner with some vision and some charisma to be able to bring them all back to the bargaining table each year and keep it together until it's time to dismantle it.
A hands-off owner, Reinsdorf deferred all decisions and their results to Krause.
The only real decisions, of course, that I made were to get people who knew what they were doing so I could stand out of the way and let them get their jobs done.
We talk about everything, and I will give him my reasoning and thing, but basically basketball, he's left it to me to make those decisions.
This is what fuddles me about the Reinsdorf ownership, is that all of this was going on beneath him here. And I never get the feeling he was so hands-on in certain times when he should have been. He always sat back and said, nope, this is Krause's baby.
Jerry Reinsdorf's hands-off approach, I think did a lot of damage to the Bulls in the fact that at some point
you have to take responsibility of your franchise. I think that approach was the demise of the Chicago Bulls.
He's a loyal guy, and he believes that Jerry Krause did a lot to build that dynasty, and he's not going to just cast him aside, not even for Michael Jordan.
In the end, you lost them both, Jordan and Jackson, because Reinsdorf refused to ever side with the other two. He had to side and be loyal to Jerry Krause to the end.
Jerry Reinsdorf loyalty is a most admirable trait, but also a weakness in this case, because it resulted in the demolition of this team.
When we return, the #1 reason you can't blame Jerry Krause for the demise of the Bulls.
Had Michael Jordan been there, the demise would have never occurred.
We're counting down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Jerry Krause for the demise of the Chicago Bulls. Here's what we've seen. Number 5, Jerry Krause. He built the Bulls. Number 4, Scottie Pippen. He could have stayed. Number 3, Phil Jackson. He also could have stayed. Number 2, Jerry Reinsdorf. He could have stepped in.
Welcome back to the top 5 reasons you can't blame Jerry Krause for the demise of the Chicago Bulls. You've seen reasons 5 through 2. This is one where you might struggle to buy in, and I'm with you on this. But we're not done yet. Here now, the #1 reason.
Michael Jordan, the best and most influential player in the NBA, could have come down to earth and kept the Bulls together.
Michael Jordan is responsible for demonizing Jerry Krause.
For all his gifts and his glibness, Michael Jordan is still at heart the guy who picks on the kid at the back of the bus sometimes. And Jerry Krause was that kid for many years for him.
One day we were on the bus, and Michael said from the back of the bus, "Jerry, you can go fishing tomorrow. They got a lot of lakes out here." He said, don't worry about it if you don't catch anything. You can always eat the bait.
Jerry Krause was first and foremost Michael Jordan's enemy. Michael Jordan is everyone's hero. We gotta hate Jerry Krause.
Jordan had a personal animus for Krause that was almost contemptible. And that boiled over into a friction between players and the general manager that shouldn't have been there, didn't need to be there.
Let's face it, Michael Jordan is the reason the Bulls won. But Krause did a few things that helped, and it wouldn't have killed him to give him a little bit of credit, but Michael just couldn't find it in his heart to do that.
When we traded Charles Oakley for Bill Cartwright, Michael came out and blasted me personally and blasted the organization and said we never should have traded Charles.
Michael could have made it easier by just, being nice to the guy every once in a while. But hey, let's face it, Michael was the man. No matter what he did, he could do no wrong in the eyes of his teammates and the fans.
Michael had so much power with his teammates, with his coaching staff, that if he had made the move to come back, it's likely that other guys would have followed.
I mean, I would have stayed if Michael was there. I definitely would have stayed.
I think Jordan's retirement hurt the Bulls the most. If Jordan stays, Phil Jackson stays, Scottie Pippen stays, the team stays intact, because Jordan, he's the man in Chicago. He makes that thing go.
Had Michael Jordan been there, the demise would have never occurred. They never would have gone from a world championship to 15, 17 victories in one season. You can attribute it almost totally to Michael Jordan's departure.